Hi, everyone, and welcome back to RETOOL. I'm Dan Ronan, the Associate News Editor here at Transport Topics. For the next 30 minutes, I'll be hosting this edition of the Brown Bag Lunch segment. While you enjoy your lunch, I'm going to be looking into the camera and asking 10 or 15 questions of our guest about some important issues that concern trucking executives. As today's focus is technology, the question will be focusing on fleet safety, roadside inspections, and regulatory compliance. To provide the executive perspective, I'm joined by Drew Anderson. He is the Senior Director of Product Development for PrePass. He brings more than 25 years of experience combining regulatory compliance and technology. As the Senior Director of Product Development, he's responsible for all of the product planning and execution through all lifecycle segments of the business. Through collaboration with the key internal and external stakeholders, his team is responsible for setting the course and the development for the product roadmaps and the overall priorities for PrePass and PrePass Plus product offerings. Hi, Drew. Thanks for joining us today. Good to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Dan. It is fantastic to be here.
To our attendees, I hope you have your lunch ready. So let's begin our questioning for Drew. Drew, in a world of virtually unlimited possibilities with information technology, managers are too often, as we know, overwhelmed by one decision. The question is where to start. That was a question that we recently posed in Transport Topics readers as far back as 2009. It's still relevant today, though, isn't it? Perhaps even more so.
Well, it certainly is, Dan. And there's unfortunately no one pat answer to that. It really depends upon where you are and where you're going. And I mean, that may seem a little trite, but there is a lot of truth to that. We undertake technology initiatives, but they have to be tied to strategic goals as well as overall mission and vision of the organization. So, in other words, where do we really want to go? And does everybody understand that in the organization? So that's really the first question is what are the key things that we want to accomplish as opposed to adopting technology for technology's sake? The next critical area, in my opinion, is prioritization. I've never talked to a trucking organization that has unlimited resources. And so you have to prioritize what we're going to do first. And that implies that somebody's going to get told no. So, do they understand why we can't put that at the top of the list? And will they buy into that and support the decisions of the organization moving forward? Then we can really effectively implement those key items that we want to move forward instead of trying to paint a broad brush.
In so many sectors of the economy, whether it be trucking or any other industry, all you hear about is data, data, data. What does the data show? What is this? What about the data? Well, okay, what role can data play, and how do I know if it's the right type of data? I may be looking at something, it may be data, but it might not be relevant to what my particular mission is.
Well, that's a great question. And I remember, Dan, boy, I guess it was probably 8 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, at all the trade shows, the buzz was big data. And so everybody had a play in the big data field. In my 13 years in this industry, I've never run across an executive yet, maybe they're out there, but not yet, who's proclaimed, I need more data or I don't have enough data. Whether you call it big data, metadata, it doesn't really matter. Again, I tie it back. What is the problem we're trying to solve? I've never been a big fan of throwing more data at the problem. I am, however, a big believer in having clean data. In any real technology project that involves data, three-quarters of the challenge is actually getting good, clean data. If I can get that up front, the implementation of it after that is relatively straightforward. I'm using air quotes here, right? Because it's never as simple as one might think. But accessing that clean data is also key. From a consistency and a formatting perspective, you're dealing with multiple data sources. So, clear, consistent access is always an ongoing concern. And do I have the right data? Again, so often I talk to motor carriers at events, and it's like I don't have a shortage of data. I have almost too much data. and I don't know what to do with it. So I think, in a very real sense, companies may find solace in the old adage that less is more.
Okay, so does the new technology and data equate to better safety? Because we're all in this to make the industry safer. Does this equate to better safety?
I think it certainly can. There's no doubt about that. And we've seen lots of really effective innovations over the last several years. But I think we run the risk, and I've seen this in my short time in the industry, of having the pendulum swing too far in one direction. From a federal perspective, they use the acronym CSA BASICS. BASIC, BASIC, stands for Behavior Analysis Safety Improvement Category. And the first word in that acronym is behavior. So, driver behavior is where it all starts and stops. I work with a large carrier, and they got a great program in place where they run every piece of new technology that's going to go into the cab by a committee of drivers first. And they have this group of drivers. It rotates, maybe annually or every couple of years, but regardless, anything that is new, that's exciting, that's interesting, that may help safety, goes through that committee first, and they put it through its paces in a test environment. They get it out on the road, and only when it passes muster with that committee does it go into the cab of the truck. And I think that's a great approach.
Do you urge other companies that when you talk to do this, to have this type of a committee set up and say, this is something that's worked here and you should consider it?
I I believe so. The adoption of technology, I mean, at the end of the day, is critical, right? I mean, all these great ideas can be put out there, and it sounds fantastic, right? But if the adoption isn't there, then it's really sort of pointless. I remember, and this was again several years ago, Dan, but I was at this happened actually two trade shows back to back, and they have these panel discussions every now and then, and they had a group of high powered motor carriers, senior level executives at fleets that you would know, and the topic of the panel discussion was what's new in technology or something to that effect. So very interesting topic. There was a nice hook there, and when that thing started, everybody gathered around the stage, particularly the allied members. I remember it very clearly. It was very exciting. Oh, we're going to hear from the carriers' mouths what the latest and greatest is. And okay, and I was right there. And I remember this so clearly, Dan. What they did was not really talk about the direction of new technology, but they basically excoriated the audience and said, guys, we are tired of being approached by allied members in the industry with these fantastical claims of phenomenal ROIs, technology that's going to slice my bread, right, and feed my dog and everything in between, because it just never comes to fruition. So please stop coming to us with all of this stuff that really doesn't pan out. We only want real solutions that actually solve problems. And I remember that as if it was yesterday, and I take it to heart even today.
Got a question I want to ask you about, since this is something, an area that you're very much involved in, and that concerns the inspection selection system, ISS safety scores. What are some ways that trucking companies can improve their specific ISS scores to increase the likelihood that they may have a way station bypass rate improvement? What can be done?
Well, that's a great question, Dan. And as you probably know, I sort of cut my teeth in the industry on CSA and ISS back in the Vigilo days. Um, and in my opinion, the key is to focus on the best few. So, what I mean by that is, as I mentioned before, nobody has unlimited resources. So, if I've got 20 drivers or 2,000 drivers, I have a limited budget and I have limited access to those people. And so, what is the message or the best few, the top two or three messages that I can communicate to those drivers. Remember, it's all about driver behavior. That's going to have, excuse me, the biggest impact. And so, what we want to do is really start looking what I call root cause violations. And root cause violations are things such as observable defects, obvious defects or violations that an enforcement officer is going to see during a walk around that's going to lead him or her to do a further inspection, right? Another example of a root cause, and this is sort of an obvious one, but it's speeding violations, right? So if you're pulled over for a speeding violation, that is an invitation to enforcement to conduct a more, a larger inspection. So those are typically the ones that cause a big inspection where now I've got log violations, I've got load securement issues that came up. So one little thing, maybe a flat tire or speeding violation, is now turned into this huge event, right? The ISS is driven by your CSA basics. And so keeping those in check and knowing which buttons and levers to push, and there's a finite number of those that are available to a motor carrier to activate, right? So I can push or pull certain levers and it will have these impacts. The key is to know, okay, which are the best few. So I'm not flailing about playing whack-a-mole. I've got a very focused strategy, and the result will pay off. I've seen it happen time and time again.
You mentioned driver behavior, and I want to talk about this in a little bit more in depth. Are there at fleets and in trucking companies a handful of drivers who are influencers who can, by their professionalism, the way they handle themselves, the way they drive their vehicles, that can be influencers and can keep things in the clubhouse uh, like a baseball player does, like a great baseball player does. They're a clubhouse leader, that the way they handle themselves, the way they go about their business, it carries over into other parts of the operation.
Without a doubt. And I say that with emphasis. So when we at PrePass look at launching a new product or a new technology initiative, um, one of the things I focus on is trying to find those influencers within my organization who will carry my message, as it were. If I can, and I know who those people are, they may be in a leadership position or they may not be in a leadership position. That really doesn't matter. But they are viewed amongst their peers as leaders, okay, and influencers, and people listen to them. They go to them for advice when they have a problem. So when I'm looking to do an implementation strategy, I'm always looking for those influencers first. And I'm going to get those folks on board and I'm going to listen to their feedback very early on and adjust my course accordingly. That way, when the implementation, whatever it may be, actually comes to fruition, I've got those people in my corner. So, there's always going to be issues with a new technology implementation, right? There's always going to be naysayers and people who, sort of chafe at anything new. I remember when ELDs were coming out and drivers were saying over my dead body, right? Well, you talk to drivers today, and it's like you can't pry this from my cold dead hands. So,
How did we ever work without one of these things?
right, exactly. So that's a great question, and I think it's critical.
So find the influencers within the company, the leaders, and get them to give you feedback, honest feedback. Uh, and if they give you honest feedback that the product is not worthwhile, don't try to push it. But if they buy into it, that makes your job a little easier.
Well, it comes down to a great solution that is poorly implemented, Dan, ends up being a poor solution.
Indeed. We're talking with Drew Anderson. He's the Senior Director of Product Development at PrePass, and we're at about the halfway point of our conversation. I want to talk about a topic that is very concerning to all of those in the industry. And there's a technology angle to this as well, Drew. The trucking industry, as we know, has been struggling for many years, and now in hopefully what is a post-COVID era, struggling to recruit and retain enough professional drivers to do the job in what is what we all know is a very tight labor market. How can we use technology and data to help companies improve the driver satisfaction? And more importantly, maybe not more importantly, but just equally as important, the retention issue. Because if you have drivers who are satisfied, you're likely to keep them in the cab.
Well, I think we can actually tie a few pieces together with that question. I'd go back to my earlier comments about that carrier who runs all new technology ideas that are going to go into the cab through their driver committee.
Driver committee, yeah.
Um, the driver shortage issue. I mean, don't quote me on this, but I believe I'm fairly
It is
safe.
you're being video recorded. Don't quote me on this.
Right? You can edit this out, but no, I believe I I swear that the driver shortage issue has been on ATRI's top 10 list since I've been in the industry. It's an ongoing issue, right? Um, and I think maybe we could turn it around, right? We tend to look at that question from the outside in. In other words, what can we bring into the organization that's going to help recruitment and retention? I would suggest looking at it from the inside out. Um, Drivers talk. These influencers are very real. You can look at a multitude of driver chat rooms out there. They're all over the place. Drivers talk to each other. And the organic influence, the word of mouth buzz, is far more effective. I mean, we've learned that in marketing forever, right? It's much more effective, much more cost effective, better ROI on word of mouth and people talking to each other versus spending X amount of dollars on some ad buy. Not that you shouldn't buy ads in transport topics. I encourage that, right? But you know what I'm saying? That word of mouth is key. So I tend to try to think of it from the inside out. How can we take the buzz that we've got, the momentum in these key areas, and then take it from the inside out? I think that's going to have every bit as impact on retention and recruitment as trying to get the new shiny object to dangle from the mirror that is going to somehow attract drivers.
I've talked to a lot of trucking industry recruiters and the like about this problem, and they say one of the areas that we need to, as an industry, look at is underserved communities, finding more women, finding more minorities, finding folks, and letting them know about the value of these jobs, their worth to the community and to the economy, and also using social media platforms to recruit drivers because, as you said, drivers spend a lot of time on chat rooms. Young people use social media platforms such as TikTok and others to learn about things and to talk to influencers. So why shouldn't we as an industry be doing the same thing?
Yes, yes, and yes. I am a huge fan of Trucking Moves America Forward. I remember years ago I went out to their launch at their Capitol Hill office in Washington, and I think what the ATA has done with that program is phenomenal. I think there is a tremendous amount more they can do, but those underserved communities are a key target for this industry. And, we've seen, Dan, over the last, what is it now? I've sort of lost track of how long we've been in this pandemic environment, but
About 18 months.
18 months, right? But boy, the industry sure looked good. I mean, we stepped up and we got the job done and kept this country moving and continue to do so. So I think leveraging that not only on a national level with Trucking Moves America Forward and sort of the big splashier things, but also specifically, as you mentioned, let's look at it from the inside out. How do we leverage that success and get those influencers on those social media platforms and the word organically starts to get out. And then I think hopefully we start to see some movement. But this is a problem that's been ongoing, and there's no magic bullet, obviously.
We've got about 10 minutes left in our conversation, Drew, so I want to hit on some of these other topics as well. Uh, some fleets talk about, recruiting drivers, and some might indeed be tempted to ease their hiring standards somewhat as a way to increase the pool of potential candidates. But how can fleets balance the need to recruit more drivers with the imperative to operate safe and as safe as possible, especially in light of the fact that the industry seems to have a target on its back from the plaintiff's bar with regards to big verdicts, the so-called nuclear verdicts. You want to have, the best driver you can, but you also want to have a safety program that is essentially locked down so that when the lawyers start poking through your files and everything and doing depositions, you don't get yourself clubbed.
Well, so my focus in this industry, Dan, has been safety first and foremost. And I'm just not a big fan of looking at shortcuts in any way, shape, or form around safety. Now, there are some things that can be done, but let's face it, if you do not have a safe fleet, you're not going to have any drivers to worry about anyway. They'll either be working for your competitor, or your salespeople will find themselves in situations where they're losing business to competitors because they can tell a better safety story than you can. And so then the business basically dries up, and and your problem is solved, right? Again, this driver shortage has been around as long as I've been, um, but shortcuts around safety is not something that I would really even try to navigate. I mean, it's look, the industry has a phenomenal safety record. If if you look at how we operate in the context of vehicle miles traveled, there is nothing that stacks up. I mean, literally nothing stacks up. But of course, large truck accidents are spectacular and they make the 5 o'clock news. Whereas you can have 100 passenger vehicle accidents and you won't hear a peep, right? And so I think it's just in the safety environment in terms of taking shortcuts. I wouldn't really entertain that. I would just keep pushing forward. Um, and the drivers that I want anyway behind the wheel of the truck take safety very seriously. They see that as part of their job, part of the culture, and it's worked very well.
Yeah, those men and women are truly professionals in terms of what they do. That's just the way they live their life and do their work. Let's talk about emerging technologies. Which ones do you see on the horizon that have the greatest potential to improve both safety and efficiency?
Well, I mean, I think you have to, as everybody would probably expect, put autonomous vehicles at the top of that list. There is a long road ahead of us as far as adoption, and I think more from it. There's a technology adoption thing, and that's on track, right? We're years out still, but it is moving. I think the bigger challenge is going to be public acceptance of these trucks going down the road. I know that Too Simple just ran a test. I don't recall exactly where the point to point was, but it was a load of watermelons. I remember that reading in the article, and they did that very successfully with no incident. So as that becomes more common and the general public gets more comfortable in these types of events, I think that's going to be a no-brainer in terms of safety. There is sort of a sidebar attached to that, though, and that is enforcement of laws on the highway, right? So we tend to think of autonomous vehicles as very exciting, right? Certainly, if you're in the industry, it's interesting. It certainly could help with the driver shortage. Um, and we think of it sort of globally, and we don't remember that we have a environment set up constitutionally that there's 50 states that control the enforcement of their highway laws. And so you don't have a national highway enforcement program. You have a 50 state highway enforcement program. And we've seen that for forever since CSA came about, right? State disparity in enforcement. And so that issue is going to carry forward when autonomous vehicles come in. What are the thresholds that each state is going to be comfortable with allowing autonomous vehicles to roll? And I think another one, real quickly, is going to be level 8 inspections. Those are also coming, and that will essentially it's an electronic inspection, right, where the truck can send quite a large volume of data to the scale in advance as they're approaching the scale. And this basically affords the officer to conduct an inspection. I'm oversimplifying it, but this is basically how it works. They can conduct an inspection electronically. And so they don't have to have a manual intervention. The truck doesn't have to pull in. Officer doesn't have to get out of the scale and do a walk around or whatever the case may be. And I think just having that, the sheer volume of increased inspections without human intervention, I think there's only upside as far as safety goes. That's an upside for sure.
Got just a couple minutes left, Drew, and I want to ask a couple questions about PrePass. What type of information sharing activities does your company engage in with regulatory groups such as the state or federal agencies or independent groups?
Well, PrePass, it's important for people to remember PrePass is a true, and I emphasize that word, true public private partnership. And it actually works very much as a public private partnership. So, as such, we are very careful not to cross the streams, as it were, between our work with regulatory agencies and our trucking customers. Our trucking customers rely on us to use data to enable them to effectively bypass scales and pay their tolls automatically. So we do not share that data with regulatory agencies. Now, what we do is through the PrePass Safety Alliance Board of Directors, we bring both sides together. So there's roughly 40 some odd members on the board that's split pretty much down the middle between the public and private sector. And so we bring both sides to the table to look for common solutions that support the mission of PrePass, which is to make highways safer and improve operational efficiencies. So if we're doing one of those two things or both in combination and they're not mutually exclusive, then we're doing our job.
Is there a certain type of information, certain type of data that PrePass in your technology is capable of capturing the speed, the vehicle location, that sort of thing? Is that data available?
It is. So the ones that you mentioned specifically, we capture, and those are available to our motor carrier customers on a customer basis, right? So we do not aggregate that type of data, and certainly we don't share it with anybody. When people think of PrePass, our core competencies really lie in sort of three major areas, and that being bypass data, tolling data, and safety data. We have very close to 750,000 trucks today who use our services, either tolling or bypassing or a combination of the both. That is what I would call a statistically significant chunk of the commercial motor vehicle market. And so we're able to use that data very effectively to help our customers and, where appropriate, to help enforcement for the sole purpose of making highways safer. That's, again, it all comes back to, can we use the data to improve safety? Or can we use the data to improve people's operational efficiency to make their job a little bit easier? And it's fun for me, Dan, if I can sort of just do a personal plug. It makes my job fun because if you remember that story I told about the trade show where the heavy hitter executives said, don't come to me with any pie in the sky solutions. What makes it fun for me is I get to stand up in front of these executives. I get to reiterate the mission of making highways safer and improving operational efficiencies. And I'm going to show you specifically what I can do. And if that will help you, then great, let's talk. If you've already got stuff in place, I don't want to waste your time, but it makes it very fun and enjoyable to be part of the industry and do what I do relative to safety.
Drew, before we go and before we wrap up, where can people find out more information about PrePass? Where are you at on social media? How can they reach out to you?
The easiest, and thank you for asking, the easiest thing to do would be to go to our website, simply prepass.com. Uh, we are also on all the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter. I can't even remember them all now. It's funny. What are they? And I try to name them all, and I drew a blank, right? But
Yeah.
Prepass is a name and a brand that's known throughout the industry. So anytime you search for Prepass, and you will absolutely find us.
Drew, it's been a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for joining us.
Dan, I cannot thank you enough. It's been a great half hour, and I appreciate it very much. So thank you.
We've been joined during this brown bag lunch segment with Drew Anderson. He's the Senior Director of Product Development for PrePass. As we said at the top, he brings over 25 years of experience combining regulatory compliance and technology. And you can find out more about the company at prepass.com. I'm Dan Ronan, the Associate Editor, the Associate News Editor at Transport Topics. Thanks for watching.